Hey there, Ocean Communications. Welcome back to another mini rant. This time I am talking about found footage films. Mainly what this video is a response to the Nostalgia Critic's editorial where he talked about should we stop making found footage movies. And my answer to that is yes, we should. Not entirely. Not It's not something that we should stop doing for the rest of eternity, so to speak. I'm not saying we should never make another found footage film. I'm not saying the filmmakers should never do another film like that ever again. I'm just saying we should stop right now before we end up making it the genre even more of a joke and even more of something that we don't want to see enough as it is. That's what I'm talking about. Because the genre's gotten to the point now where it is so oversaturated that anytime you hear about a found footage film, you automatically start to roll your eyes. When it comes to the paranormal activity, the ghost dimension, which is just a really stupid title. But either way, anybody sees that trailer, when they heard of the idea, like another one of these movies, oh god, I've had enough. But, The Visit made $60 million, so maybe we do want more, but maybe we don't. I don't know. But for me personally, I don't want any more. Even though I like As Above, So Below, I like The Tunnel, I liked Unfriended, but I don't really consider Unfriended a found footage film. Unfriended, nobody finds the footage. Unfriended is a POV horror film. There's a difference between a POV horror film and a found footage film, in my opinion. A POV horror film, you can see that kind of stuff when it doesn't even have found footage involved. With Unfriended, it's from the point of view of the girl while she's on her computer throughout the entire movie. I don't really consider it's kind of found footage, but not really. Um, but this is a genre I've personally never been the biggest fan of. But even if I was, I would be getting pretty damn sick of it already. 483 titles from the genre alone are on IMDb, and a lot of them have come out in the past few years or so. They've become the genre that's become the quick buck genre. Let's just print it on, hopefully a new found footage movie will start printing some money. It's become the go-to genre for cheap, low-budget horror films. And this is a trend that isn't new. This is something that has happened in the past with what what is and kind of used to be one of my favorite genres of horror, subgenres of horror, and that is the slasher genre. What's going on with the found footage genre right now is the same thing that happened in the slasher genre. That's why I want them to stop now before it gets even worse, because that's what happened with the slasher genre. The slasher genre started out in the 80s, or maybe a little bit before that in the late 70s, and it really started out great. It had a lot of fun, good slasher movies. Some of my favorite horror films are slasher films, and most of them are slasher films that I really find a lot of fun to watch. But as the decade of the 80s went on, and especially after 1985, for instance, especially in the late 80s, the quality of slasher films just got really bad. It got worse and worse with every passing year. It didn't help that the Motion Picture Association of assholes kept cutting and editing the gore out of the movies, which is one of the main reasons a lot of people wanted to see slashers is for the gore. And the Motion Picture Association of assholes said, "Fuck you, no, you don't get to see it," which that hurt the genre a lot. But what hurt the genre the most was oversaturation. There have been too many slasher films. Like every horror film that seemed to come out was a slasher movie. And it just got to the point where, it's too much of one thing. And that's what's going on with the found footage genre. It's getting to the point where it's too much of one thing in the horror genre. We want something a little bit different, something more than just another found footage film. And so that's become a problem. I mean, the slasher genre especially really became oversaturated in the late 80s with the birth of the direct-to-video boom. The direct-to-video era where you had all these direct-to-video companies who were making these cheap, low-budget horror films, and they chose to do a lot of slashers, which really made the slasher cheap. And really, for people who got into the horror films and were watching slashers in the late 80s and early 90s, the slasher film was considered a cheap movie. It was considered a cheap horror film. It's just, it was considered something that was no longer something that we praised and something that we really enjoyed. It became more of a joke. and that's what ended up that's Scream came out, and then it solidified that even more. Maybe the found footage genre needs a film like Scream where they end up basically doing a satire of the genre. Not a straight up parody like The Haunted House, but like a satire of it. That might be an interesting take on the found footage genre, and maybe that might finally, maybe that'll bring it some new life, but also, in a way, Scream also killed the slasher genre, and in some aspects a little bit, but the slasher genre is already dead before, because of oversaturation. Another recent little subgenre of horror that was really, really popular at one point in time was the torture horror genre, which I'm not the biggest fan of, but it got oversaturated with the Saw films, the Saw franchise, and films like Saw, like Hostel and Hostel Part 2, and it just became there's too much of that torture porn, and we got to the point where it ceased to serve the purpose it originally had for us. We weren't entertained by it anymore because we had seen it over and over and over and over and over again. And with the found footage genre especially, when almost pretty much 95% or even more than that, like 97, 96, 98% of found footage films all end the same way, where everyone dies in the end, it just makes it so it's a really predictable genre. That why would I want to watch a found footage film when a majority of the time the movie ends exactly the same way as the other found footage film that I saw does? Um, and they all deal with the similar elements and similar things, and they all try to have like humorous moments in the beginning and then try to be scary, and they all go with the jump scares, and they usually have a real dearth of likable characters or even character development. And so, and they all look fairly cheap and low budget and amateurish, which is because that's what they are. They're what found footage films. I mean, it started with Cannibal Holocaust with Ruggero Deodato, but then Blair Witch Project really made it really mainstream. And I haven't seen the film in years, but I really remember not being the biggest fan of that film. But I do appreciate that film over some of the other films that came after it. There were definitely some intentions behind this film that you could see, and it felt like there was at least some sort of vision behind Blair Witch Project. You don't really have that with a lot of these other films, these found footage films. They're just jump scares. That's all they are. They're excuses to have cheap jump scares and to make a really cheap horror film and to make a profit. And it worked out really well for the Paranormal Activity films for a creator who I don't really think is even that talented. And when it comes to people who defend the genre, it's each their own. Hey, if it's one of your favorite genres, that's fine. But I don't think, in particular, the Nostalgia Critic's argument was really that good. It wasn't even that compelling either. His argument was that, well, there's a few good movies from the found footage genre, so that's enough to keep the genre going, and it's enough for people to keep making the found footage films. Well, I disagree with that. It's exactly how I feel about movie remakes. Yeah, there's some really good remakes out there, but they're very rare, and a lot of shit outweighs the stuff that doesn't stink and the stuff that isn't shit. So if you got a whole pile of shit and there's only like a few little diamonds in the pile of shit, I'm sorry, I don't think it's worth keeping piling more piles of shit just to maybe get a few more, maybe just a couple more diamonds. It's a bad track record. Like I mentioned earlier, it's like a pay-per-view boxer. It's like a boxer who gets knocked out more times than he wins any fights, and he keeps getting pay-per-view matches. There's a serious disconnect when it comes to that. And the same thing happens to found footage film. There are way more bad found footage films lately than there are good ones. So it just makes you think, okay, why do they keep making these movies if the majority of them tend to suck? And so that's the thing. And the found footage films have become the new thing for really low budget filmmakers to just use it as a little crutch to be able, okay, I could get my name out there and I can do anything and I can do all this stuff with just really cheap budget. I don't have to worry about characters. All I got to do is make it look like it's found footage and have, some jump scares, and there we go. But that's just, it's lazy. It's laziness. That's really what it is. Found footage might have started out as something that wasn't lazy, but now it's just complete and total laziness from a filmmaker's perspective. And that's what I definitely disagree with, the point that Nostalgia Critic made, where he's talking about, oh, found footage is actually one of the hardest genres to do right, and to write and do well, do good. And how is it hard? What is so hard about writing a found footage film? You don't have to worry about character development half the time. Maybe a little bit, just maybe have them say some likable stuff and they're not complete assholes. But you don't have to show them their backstory. You don't have to do any of that. You don't have to delve into any of that. So that's actually pretty easy, to be honest, in terms of writing characters for found footage films. In a way, some of the same sort of things that slasher films had. You just had a little bit about who these characters are, but they had likable personalities. So you just had to create some characters with some likable personalities, and there you go. Uh, um, yeah, they have limitations, but that doesn't mean they have to have those limitations. Found footage films can easily have all this other crazy stuff happening in them, which is what the new Paranormal Activity is doing. It's not that they can't have these crazy things going on and all these different things going on at once. They easily can, but they just choose not to, because when they started out, they were doing it on the cheap. But now, once they get further into the franchise and then they get a little bit more money to work with, they can do more and do all this craziness and all this crazy stuff. Sometimes you choose not to do that, and that ends up being good, a little less is more approach. But I fail to understand why found footage films, especially, are like one of the hardest genres to write for, one of the hardest things to get right. Really, what you got to have is likable characters and some decent camera work and an interesting hook, an interesting story, and there you go. And then some monsters and maybe some ghosts and some scares. It maybe a little bit of gore. That's all you need. It's like saying it's really hard to do a porn film to me. Found footage genres to me, especially found footage films to me, are some of the easiest horror films to make. Some of the hardest horror films for me to make and do right are horror anthologies, because you got to have not one good story, you got to have multiple good stories. And that's a hard thing to do. So in my opinion, I think the horror anthology in particular is definitely a harder genre to subgenre of horror to write for and to do and really make good films than found footage. I mean, found footage it's not hard to write a found footage movie. It's not something that's really that difficult to write. Is it then that's probably why it is rare to find a really good one, because I'll admit it is hard to see and find really good found footage films, but that's because they have so much severe limitations to work with in terms of, okay, it's found footage, so we always have to have the camera on, we always have to have this going on, we always have to have that, when we don't have enough time for really good character development. And we also found a lot of found footage films are very short. So we also have this understanding that we can't have the film be longer than an hour and a half, because then it just feels a little bit too long, and so forth and so on. So found footage films, I think, are good when you have something like Cloverfield or these other movies that enable to get your adrenaline rush, going, so to speak. I like the found footage films that use the found footage to enhance the film and to make it not just a gimmick. Because that's really what it feels like lately. It's just a gimmick. It's a gimmick. That's what it is. Found footage is a gimmick. And it's a gimmick that a lot of people, including myself, are getting tired of. So the answer to the question, should found footage films stop? Should we quit doing them? Yeah, yes, we should take a break. We should stop making them for a little bit. Stop relying on these cheap found footage horror films and start and these studios should start looking at these independent horror films that aren't found footage films. They create their own stories with really good characters and so forth and so on, and get those films on the screen and give them wide releases. Films like The Babadook and films like I think Tales from Halloween's a horror anthology that's coming out soon. I don't know if it's going to get that wide of a release. Those type of movies like Housebound and these independent horror films like Deathgasm and Cooties and The Final Girls. These type of movies. These are the horror films that should get the wide releases. Not Paranormal Activity, The Ghost Dimension, or whatever other found footage horror concept or whatever horror film you can come up with. Stop force-feeding us those lazy horror films in theaters, and let's give us more of the actual original stories again. And see, that's what I definitely disagree with I mean, I'm going to repeat it again. I don't know where Nostalgia Critic, I don't know where Doug got that from. That the found footage genre is one of the hardest things to get right, and one of the hardest genres in horror to do and write for. Because I think it's a load of bullshit. The horror genre itself is full of many different other subgenres that are a lot harder to get done correctly and to make great films than the found footage genre is one of the easiest ones to do. When it comes to creating an original horror story and to do something like It Follows, that's more difficult to me than just to, hey, write a bunch of, cardboard characters, throw in some jump scares, and it just a bunch of POV shots, and almost every found footage film seems to have the same scares. So that's another thing that hurts the genre. That's another thing that hurt the slasher genre. Another thing that hurt the torture horror genre. These are all things that killed those genres, and they didn't learn the lesson then, and they kept beating a dead horse over and over again. And then they kept beating it until there was no dead horse left to beat. And so that's the thing. I mean, for people who like this genre, cool, but it's getting to the point where it's too much, and and then there's not gonna be any more found footage films, or rarely ever see any, because well, there's too many that have been made. So then there's nothing new to really offer to the genre because almost everything has been done before. So that's the problem when it comes to this type of genre, and it's gotten to that point now where it's so oversaturated, where it's a really rare occurrence that you see a good one. So that means, in my opinion, that you should stop. You should stop and start giving these other films, these other horror films, who have much better concepts, better stories, better characters, and give them the time of day, and give them the theatrical releases that you're giving to these lazy found footage films, which are just repeating the same scares and the same stuff that we've seen already in a million other found footage movies. So that's the thing. I don't want to support laziness, because that's honestly what a lot of the found footage films are lately. There's lazy, cheap horror films that are just thrown out in theaters just to get a quick buck. And then most of the time they succeed, which is really too bad. But while there's other films that are so much better, so much more unique, have so much more work put into them, and so much more passion and effort, that don't get the theatrical releases that these found footage films do, that are released by these studios that just kind of just half-ass them, like The Gallows, and like Paranormal Activity: The Ghost Dimension, like a Demonic. I think that might have been a found footage film as well. excuse See, I'm allergic to found footage. I'm allergic to this bullshit. I'm allergic to this laziness. But yeah, I disagree with the idea that we should keep making them just because there's a few good diamonds in the pile of shit. That's not enough a reason to keep doing it, because you're just gonna keep making more shit. And I don't know about you. I don't want to keep making more. I don't want to keep piling more shit on top of more shit. So yeah, I'm all for stop making these movies. Let the genre breathe for a little bit. Stop beating the dead horse. Let it I mean, maybe let it make a recovery, or stop digging a hole, digging the same hole, because that's what they're doing. They're digging in the same hole. The producers in these studios, or the found footage genre, are digging a hole, and they're digging the same hole, and it's getting deeper and deeper and deeper, and it's going to get to the point where they're not going to be able to get out, and well, that's where the found footage genre is going to be buried. And only every now and then is that genre going to get resurrected, like, for example, the slasher genre, which just seems to get resurrected when it wants to be a satire, like Cabin in the Woods, which tried but failed, in my opinion, or a film like The Final Girls, but that looks like a lot of fun. It looks like a good take on that. But it does look like a genre that is getting to that same point where the slasher genre is, where it's gotten so oversaturated at the point where it's almost impossible to come up with a new concept and to come up with a new way to present the slasher film. So, and it has gotten to that point, in my opinion, where it's almost become impossible to present a new way to present a found footage movie. And when you get to that point, then you should just stop, because it's no longer something that is worth trying to reinvent, or no longer something that's worth trying to really do a lot with. It's like reinventing the wheel. It's gonna be extremely difficult to do because now the limitations of the genre are known. Now it's been oversaturated. Now it is a genre that people are already kind of tired of anyway. And now you put in the thing that you made too many found footage films to the point now where it's going to be almost impossible to really do something new with the genre. And even if you do, it's not like something that hasn't been done. Like the Final Girls, it looks like a lot of fun, but it's covering things that have been done in Cabin in the Woods and things that have been done in Scream and some other films that have been done before it. And that's kind of how it is in a lot of films nowadays anyway. It has gotten to the point where it's almost impossible to be completely 100% original. And I'm not expecting anything to be completely 100% original because it is that difficult to do that. But it makes sense though if you have a genre like found footage where it's just so difficult to reinvent it, and it's so easy to be lazy and just release the same thing that we've already seen before, then it's a genre that really should not be as much of the in the forefront as it still is. It should be a genre that should was put in the back burner because I think these throwback '80s horror films, which I actually really like It Follows and some of these other movies that are trying to be more like the traditional horror from the '80s and '90s, which is in my opinion the glory days of horror. And I'm absolutely fine with them taking homages and trying to be like those movies because those are some truly great horror films. Those were the glory days or the gory days for me for horror films. And I'm glad that a lot of filmmakers are looking back at the 80s and 90s horror and are like, we want to make more horror films like that. Because those were some of in those decades we had some of the best horror films ever. And so it's a good thing to take those decades and try to make horror films like that. And instead of trying to make horror films like the Paranormal Activity movies, which don't really have that timeless quality as the horror films from the 80s and 90s do, in my opinion. But that's just me personally. But yeah, so my opinion, should found footage films stop? Yes, they should. They should stop for the time being, take a little bit of a leave of absence for a little bit, and give these other better, more, in my opinion, better and more original, more unique horror films the spotlight instead. And then after you give the other horror films their chance, their due, so to speak, then you can revisit the found footage genre with new, refreshed vigor and go into it and try to do a new spin on it, try to do something different, and maybe find a way to resurrect it again. But you can't do that if you just keep releasing a found footage film like clockwork almost every month. Either it's direct to video or either it's in the theater. You can't really do that if you just keep doing that genre. You just keep doing the same thing over and over again. It's going to become repetitive. It's going to become monotonous. And there's not really that much room left for creativity at that moment. So, yeah, those are my thoughts on Nostalgia Critic's video on found footage, and yeah, that's my little mini rant on found footage. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I will see you guys later. See ya.